Welcome to the Fantasy Football Predictive Analytics podcast with Rhys Tiller and special guest Dwain McFarland. How are you doing, Dwain?
Oh man, I'm doing great. I'm glad to join you guys. Anytime I can hop on here with the young mind with Rhys, I'm going to pick up some nuggets today. I'm probably going to leave with some different opinions on some stuff.
Oh yeah, he keeps me honest, probably more than I'd like.
Well, when you first said young mind, I didn't know which one of the two of us you were talking about.
Thank you, Rhys. I'll pay you later.
Well, I bust your chops enough. I figured we had to balance it out a little bit.
Exactly, just a little.
So what have we learned this preseason, or even during training camp or OTAs or any of the off season?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so every team's a little different in how much they share and how much they show you. So you kind of have to take everything, with context. It's like nothing's equal, like you guys see it. Last week you're watching the games and some teams clearly have a different goal in mind for what they want to achieve in that game versus what other teams do. The Bills come out and run their first team offense, right? For 3 plays, throw the ball 85% of the time. They pretty much confirm our priors. That's the first time we've really got to see their starting offense. They're going to throw the ball 70% of the time. It's going to be a complete mix in the backfield. We probably don't really care to own Singletary or Moss unless one of them really falls in a draft, and then you just want to take the one that goes later. But then you have another team like Denver that completely confuses us, right? They come out and they move Jerry Jeudy to the 3rd spot. They don't play Javonta Williams. They do play Melvin Gordon. So it's clear, like with that, okay, KJ Hamler was not active. So did they just want to give Jerry Jeudy, just keep him fresh? But he's not the 3rd receiver, right? So you can't take that stuff and be like, oh, well, Jerry Judy's the 3rd receiver now. Like once you dug in afterwards, it was like, no, they wanted to get, Tim Patrick time because he hadn't gotten to play yet. Cortland Sutton hadn't gotten to play. So they wanted to give them the most snaps with the starting offense. Javonta Williams, though, on the other hand, they've seen enough from him and they wanted Melvin Gordon to come in and knock the rust off. Royce Freeman also played. So you have to pay attention, to those sort of things. But I'll start there. I'll start with Denver, because if you guys, I'm kind of tough on rookie running backs, especially when they're going in the 4th, 5th rounds. And there's receivers that you really love there, especially in like a PPR, half PPR format, because I feel like there are profiles of other backs that you can get in round 7, 8, 9 that actually end up being pretty similar to what you pay for in round 4 or 5. So if I'm going to make a premium down payment, right, on the services of a running back, that's any running back period, but especially like a rookie, I really want to know that I've got upside down the stretch. I don't have to have it out of the gate. I'm willing to spend a 5th round pick on somebody that I think it may take some time to get my, to really get my investment out of. But as long as when it comes, it's going to help me win the league. And then if I know that, I can prepare and draft differently the rest of the draft, knowing I'm probably not going to start that player week 1. Well, Javonta Williams, I'd really been out on because if you look at historically, backs that come in and play behind, 28, 29-year-old, 27-year-old type vets that most people are now saying, hey, they're washed, which Melvin Gordon qualifies as what a lot of people are calling washed. But when you really look at the data, yeah, Melvin Gordon's not as good as he used to be, but he's a player that the coaches can trust, right? He's a player that's still good. He's not great. And so I was really concerned about Williams because we just historically have not seen backs, especially 2nd round picks, come in and very often be able to really knock those people out of their roles. I will say I found this to be very interesting because typically, especially like a Vic Fangio type guy, to give Javonta Williams the rest, like what this tells me is that I need to be willing to add more exposure to Williams in the 5th round. If he slides to me in the 6th, I'm for sure going to take a shot on him there because I think there's a chance now because of Gordon being, hurt and really just kind of being injury riddled through camp. I think they saw enough of Williams that they're like, wow, we kind of like what we see and we're going to want to use it. And so I think what's going to occur now is where before it probably would have been a straight up, 2-way committee with Royce Freeman eating into the role too as the 3rd guy. I think Javonta Williams is probably going to handle, my guess, 50, 60, maybe 70% of the 1st and 2nd down work, like right out of the gate, whereas it might have only been 30% before. And so you could probably get flex value now out of Javonta Williams as your RB2 right out of the gate. You're going to you'll have some tricky weeks, but then all he's got to do is push for getting some of that passing down work as the season goes. And he may not ever get that. So you have to remember that and keep that in your range of outcomes. But I think that's something that's not being talked about that much. If you're on Twitter and stuff like that, you'll see it. Like I actually tweeted about it during the game whenever, because I've got a cool tool that refreshes in the back end as all of our folks are entering all the data, over at PFF, because they're watching every play, and I'm constantly refreshing it, looking to see like who's playing third downs, who's doing this, who's doing what, try to keep everybody up to speed, especially if it's like at a time where I know people may be drafting. And when I saw that, like I kept refreshing, being like, man, is like Williams in the game? Because I was Googling it and I couldn't see anything about Williams being not playing, Williams being hurt. And so that was something that was a big takeaway for me, this past weekend. Another one, we can kind of stick on the running backs. Antonio Gibson. I think it's actually seeing Peyton Barber, as little as it may seem, it may not seem like a very big deal to most people, but Peyton Barber being out of the picture is actually really helpful for Antonio Gibson, because we know that JD McKissic is going to stay involved in the passing role, right? And so McKissic and Hines they're really pains, because they're so good at what they do. They're not your typical back that's just blocking your young back from really getting all the situational work. They truly are elite at the little thing, at their niche, the thing they do, which is create mismatches with linebackers and safeties in situations where you know that you need to be throwing the ball. McKissic does things that Gibson probably can as well. We know he was a receiver in college, but he's so good at it, it's hard to get him off the field. Hines does things that Jonathan Taylor just can't do. Jonathan Taylor can run a swing route and catch a swing pass. He can even catch a wheel route, but he's not a guy that's going to come out there and beat a linebacker one-on-one on 3rd down and 6 whenever you've got to get a first down. Like, you're more likely to be successful with Nyheim Hines in the game. And so back to Antonio Gibson, the big thing with Barber being gone is now at least Gibson can keep all the short down and distance work. That was kind of scaring me, because they were using him that way in the first few games, Barber that is, and they did that last year in the early part of the season. And that was just enough to scare me off of Gibson at an early 2nd round pick. If he was falling to the end of the 2nd, I was still mixing him in some, but now I'm willing to take him in the middle of the 2nd, because the way I look at him at this point is he's pretty much going to handle all of the rushing duties. He's going to get the carries inside the 5, and we know that he can be a receiver. So if he even takes maybe 20-30% of the work McKissic has in the receiving game, well, all of a sudden now you're looking at him being a value in a PPR league. If for some reason McKissic gets hurt and that opens additional upside, well, then he could be a top 3 or 4 back if that happens. So I feel like you're getting a much more decent floor now, because he can score the touchdowns, and there's upside in the passing game.
Yeah, you mentioned with Javonta Williams that he was going around rounds 4 and 5. But except for CEH, last year all the rookie running backs were going round 6 and back, at least the ones that were very successful. You mentioned Antonio Gibson, but J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor. Well, Jonathan Taylor crept up draft boards later, but he was mostly going around the 6th pick until the final 2 weeks. Same thing with DeAndre Swift. So those guys all panned out, even though some were trying to tell you to draft Devin Singletary ahead of them.
So Rhys, do you think that Williams is creeping up because of the success from last year? We do have those kind of memories, don't we, Dwain?
Oh yeah, you see it with the rookie receivers this year for sure. Yeah. So last year Akers was going in the 4th and the 5th. Swift started going at the 6th, but only because of an injury that he got late in training camp. But he had been going in the 4th and the 5th round too, just like you were saying, Rhys. So yeah, that's about the sweet spot to do it. The biggest thing I would tell people, if you're going to build your roster that way, say you have some drafts coming up this weekend, is be okay taking the player in the 5th or 6th round. But I see so many people fail to then come back, and so that's a great spot to come back in the 11th or 12th round and grab a Nyheim Hines that we just talked about, so that if it takes Williams a month to get going, that you've got something that you can use. It's also a great way to come back and grab a player like I really like, that I think people should be higher on, especially if you're going with like a zero RB strategy, and that's Sony Michelle. You can get him anywhere from the 9th to 11th round. He's going to come in, he's going to immediately own a role, and there's going to be a door open that if either Henderson gets hurt or doesn't perform well, Sony Michelle, can, provide additional value, but he can at least help get you through some things. So you want to have some different players like that. Honestly, when I look at Sony Michelle, even though he's not a rookie, he's Javonta Williams 5 rounds later. because I have questions about Darrell Henderson and just his ability to stay healthy, and it's a good offense. And I'm not this huge Sony Michelle truther or anything, but I think he's better than what people give him credit for. He's kind of, Michelle's had a rough first few years, and the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. He's not a great back, but he's not a terrible back.
I would even throw guys like Gio Bernard in that late round. If you're going 0, there's several guys. If you just take a cheaper guy in a mix that's all cluttered, like Gio, because I'd take Gio over Ronald Jones. I know there's a lot of people that love Ronald Jones, but Gio's like half the price. Some of the auctions that I've seen, or there's some players in Kansas City, Chicago that I just like the depth guys. I like Jamal Williams. If I'm going 0 running back, I love Jamal Williams. And so I don't know if you do or, most.
No, I do. The key to 0 is you typically want to grab some sort of high upside play, like a Williams in round 5 or 6. Sermon fits the bill too. You could make an argument that Raheem Mostert in the 7th round provides you similar, upside to what Sermon does. And I like both of those players. And I've had people talk me over to Sermon. I've had people talk me over, to Mostert. I like both. I'm a huge Matt Waldman fan personally. So Sermon's my dude. So those are the type of, you want a couple of those. And then what you just said, you want to have, some of the passing down backs. It could be James White, Gio Bernard, this specifically in PPR and half PPR. And standard leagues, they're not going to be as valuable. Naheem Hines, JD McKissick, is another one. These guys get pushed way down the boards. And then I think what you want to do is then you want to come back and you want to really make sure that somewhere, and the other way you could access upside would be between round 8 and 10. I don't really like spending an 8th round pick on AJ Dillon because I don't think he's going to give you the versatility of really being a player you want in your lineup every week, like some people think, because I think Aaron Jones is going to take over all the 2-minute work that gets left behind by Jamal Williams. So that's going to really leave AJ Dillon handling, the rushing work that Jamal Williams had, but not taking additional rushing work probably from Aaron Jones. He could steal some touchdowns, but Aaron Jones is also really good inside the 5. He's really good inside the 10. So it's not just like you can just boot Aaron Jones off the field. He happens to be hyper efficient and may even be the better back inside the 5 than AJ Dillon. I mean, people want to say AJ Dillon is going to be that just because he's big. Just because you're big doesn't make you a good back, inside the 5. Some backs are just great inside the 5 no matter what. Alvin Kamara is another great example, and Aaron Jones to me is like on the plane with Alvin Kamara. I have Aaron Jones as my number 4 running back. But where I was going is someone like AJ Dillon gives you, if Aaron Jones went down, that gives you big upside. Kylan Hill probably sneak in and steal some passing work, but it's in a great offense. Tony Pollard in the 10th or 11th round. Alexander Mattison, people just got mad because they tried to use him in DFS last year and he didn't do well. The one week they tried to use him really cheap whenever Dalvin Cook, and it's like what you were saying, Jeff, these things stick in people's minds. And so you have to use that to your advantage. Alexander Mattison should be going around the same time as Tony Pollard, and he's going 2 or 3 rounds later. Chuba Hubbard is going to be the cuff to own whenever you look at the Carolina backfield. We already saw what Mike Davis did last year. You have Darrington Evans behind a back that's got 1,500 touches and Derrick Henry. So he and Pollard both are great situations because you have backs that are hitting that 1,500 carry mark, which, the data shows a lot of them hit a wall, or they at least, some of them fall off a cliff, some hit a wall and they're able to push through it a couple of years. But some of them just, can't handle it. And so those are great options. Those are Tony Jones Jr. is another one because he's really probably the main cuff to Kamara at this point, not Latavius Murray. So those are all guys that I would want to come back and wrap some really big upside in with some of the other players that we talked about. It's some mix of those types of players if you're going 0.
Yep.
So final question for you, or maybe my dad has one more. But what are some situations that we think are certain, but they're really not certain?
Yeah. And I think, we kind of talked about some of them, but I think a lot of people and so the way I think about how certain people are is I look at what does ADP look like?
Right.
So ADP is ultimately what tells me what people think. David Montgomery's going too high. I'm seeing him go in the 3rd round. I'm creeping up now. players are starting to creep up because they start flipping spots. Like Swift now has fallen into the fourth because people are worried about the injury. And so I don't know if it's psychological or what, but really to me, what that should mean is just don't take it back in that period, go ahead and keep taking the receivers. But people have this tendency to be like, well, if Swift's not there, then who am I going to draft there? Well, it's got to be David Montgomery. No, it doesn't have to be David Montgomery. I mean, you can make it that way, but David Montgomery's going too high. Damian Williams is there. You'll eventually get Cohen back later this season. Montgomery just really graded out poorly in everything that I look at. Explosive yards over expected. He barely could even make, the scatter plot chart. You could just see Montgomery. You couldn't even see the first name or like the rest of the name. He moves east west too much, not north south enough. Had a couple of big games against really bad defenses, and I don't want to take. I hate taking points away from players. I mean, all you can do is play the people on your schedule. But I think Montgomery got really lucky. If they would give him the passing down work, it'd be great. But I'm just worried he's not going to get it. Now you've got two layers that could really interfere with his touches. And we've just seen Matt Nagy be willing to just do kind of silly stuff, like what he's about to do with Andy Dalton, which is another that leads over to some other unknowns where people, Trey Lance, I don't have to own Trey Lance in the 10th round. I don't get it. Like, I love Trey Lance. I want access to I'm an upside drafter, big time, but I'm also into constructing the best rosters that I can. And I don't think you have to force Trey Lance. I own Trey Lance. I've done multiple drafts, but it's when I get him in the 12th or 13th round. I think you say the same thing about Justin Fields. We just don't know how long it's going to be before either one of these players. And I'm all for betting on upside. But at the same time, I think the truth around really how valuable rookies are moving forward in fantasy football is somewhere in between what we've kind of determined it to be this year based on the last couple of years versus what it will be in 3 years from now. I think rookies are more valuable than ever, but I think we're getting a little bit, out of control. I mean, it's the same thing going on, you guys know, over on, the receiver side. The good thing going for some of the receivers is if you look at Jamar Chase, and if you look at Jalen Waddle, you could almost throw Devonta Smith in there. But if you look at receivers that have gone in the top 6 draft picks, the NFL is actually pretty good at that. Since 2011, only one player that was drafted in the top 6 as a receiver didn't finish as at least a top 36 receiver. And you had multiple busts into the top 20. The one outlier was Corey Davis, who is actually probably about to have his best career, So yeah, the quarterbacks, those would be situations. A couple that I think people are not on that are pretty much locked down. Cole Kmet is going to be pretty much an every down tight end, not rotating with Jimmy Graham. It's going to be more likely Jimmy Graham just gets to be on the field with him when they're in 12 personnel. Another one that I'm looking at that is certain that's not, and I'd gotten off of this player early on because the draft price got so high. And so this is CeeDee Lamb. He got up to being a mid-second at one point. And I was like, okay, I can't take him over Justin Jefferson. I'm not going to take him over DK Metcalf. I'm not going to take him over some of the backs that are there. I'm just not going to. And I'm from Dallas, so I love CeeDee Lamb. I think he's a great player. He grades out really great in every way. But what we saw this preseason is whenever they went to 12, which is 2 tight ends and 2 receivers, or 21, which is 2 running backs, one typically being a fullback, 95% of the time, and 2 receivers. It was him staying on the field and not Michael Gallup. That was the big worry I had about taking CeeDee Lamb so high, is that you had to make a bet on the Cowboys keeping the insane pace that they did last year. And we don't know that they'll do that. If you go back and look at Dak's 4.5 games, you know how many times they led? Zero plays in that entire 4.5 games. So we don't even really know. Everybody's like, oh, McCarthy, he's already said he's going to run the fastest offense in the league. We don't really know. We know what he wants to do. And I do think it will be an up-tempo offense, because I think that's Kellen Moore and what he wants to do. And it's what the players want to do. But there's no guarantee it's going to be number 1, right? It could be number 7 in the league and be really good. But if you don't have efficiency, then that would really potentially hurt Lamb. And I was just concerned about taking him there. But now he's going to be on the field for 90% of the pass plays. If they slow down, it's okay. If they speed up, it's an added bonus. It's just going to be, and it's going to unlock a higher ADOT for him, because when you get to work in the 2 wide sets, he won't just be in the slot working underneath. He'll get more shots downfield. So CeeDee Lamb is a player that now actually should be a late 2nd round pick. And guess what? He's fallen to the mid 3rd because people have seen Amari Cooper is healthy now. So it's the perfect like situations, the best you could ever hope for, a very small thing you're hoping to see that you know is not going to move ADP, but it's going to give you the edge over other players. And another piece of news that really shouldn't change their mind about the player, because it was always there and we always knew Amari Cooper was going to play, but now you actually just hear it and it freaks people out. So that's a great example of like the psychology side, right, of fantasy football.
Yes. But you mentioned David Montgomery. One of the rules I have about drafting is you have to have enough speed to score a 70-yard touchdown. And a lot of times people say,
that's a good rule.
You draft Derrick Henry. Well, he also had a 99-yard touchdown. So you have that. But Montgomery,
that's really good. Yeah.
Montgomery doesn't have that speed. And people are just see the final 7 or 8 games where he beat up the Lions, Packers, and Vikings and Jaguars, and not realizing that he will have to play against a lot harder teams this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so what you're hitting on is actually, if you guys don't follow Tej Seth, he was an intern actually still is right now. He's awesome at Pro Football Focus, but TEJ and then his last name SETH. And he did a study, Rhys, looking at explosive rushes over expected after normalizing for number of players in the box, game situation. And so explosive rushes are carries of over 10 yards, right? And so once it had been normalized, that's actually the chart I was talking to you about, where David Montgomery was at you want to be at the top right, and David Montgomery was at the wrong end of the chart. Up in the top right, you have Nick Chubb, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, all the guys, and then you have David Montgomery in the bottom left. And so when I do my tiers, there's different qualifications that I have to make it in the tier. You do projections, but I want somebody that's at least 300 carries, under 1,500, right? I want somebody that is an explosive player, which he checks, he didn't check the box, on that. I want someone I know if I'm going to take them earlier, I want to be looking for passing down work. Do they have the first and second down work? Do they get the carries inside the 5? So he gets the carries inside the 5 and he gets the first and second down work. But if that's going to be your role, you have to have the other thing you just talked about. So there's certain combinations that will work. You don't have to be everything, but we know who those players are. They go in the top 10, right? But once you get past that, you got to know, okay, what combinations make a player work? What David Montgomery needs to be viable is the passing down work. And now he has 2 players standing in his way.
And I'm going to piggyback, and then I'm going to hit you with the last question. Piggyback, if Justin Fields gets in, he may have 3 players standing in his way between rushing, short yardage, and the dump off passes. I think Justin Fields is a net negative for Montgomery. That's just my play. So I follow you on Twitter. I enjoy following you, Dwain, because I enjoy scratching my inner nerd on the stat stuff and on the roster builds. All right, here it is. You're a huge advocate about building your draft around Jalen Hurts. Is this correct?
Yeah, and I'll throw it out there because, we're nearly through draft season. I wrote an article about really every position and what you should be thinking about from a draft strategy standpoint. So every year there's a handful of players that are going to go later, and they could be at different positions every year, right? But once you identify the positions that they're at and where you've got the highest confidence interval, like around the certain group of players, they're really going to form your core of who you're taking a lot after round 7. I draft a ton of teams. I'm highly diversified across the early rounds. There's a lot of good players I want exposure to. Once I get to round 7 or so, there's a group of about 20 players that are mixed in on all my teams. Now I'll veer from that and I'll still grab other players too. And I'm never closed off and just say, I'll never take this player. Certain players fall far enough, and if their construction works, I'll take them. But at quarterback specifically, my 3 plays are: if Russell Wilson falls to you in the 7th round, take him. If Tom Brady falls to you in the 10th round, take him. If you miss on those 2, pull the trigger on Jalen Hurts in round 11. If you miss on that, then you want to come back with a Lance/Fields, and you want to circle back, hopefully with, another quarterback that can get you through the first part of the year. But I really don't like that. It makes me a bit, I don't mind drafting those guys, but I don't really want to start Kirk Cousins for 4 or 5 weeks, even if he has good matchups, just because I know that the Vikings, if they get up on somebody, they'll throw the ball 20 times in a game, and that's it. They'll just shut it down. So each one of those quarterbacks, as you get lower, they get more game script dependent. The other name that I would throw in there is Tua. Tua I own more than any other quarterback because he's been the cheapest. But I'm all in on Tua as being a guy that I think has huge upside and you can get him super late. So sometimes I'll pair Hurts and him together. Typically I'll have Devonta Smith or I'll have Jalen Waddle on pretty much every team. But one of them is on every team. I need to go back and look at that. There's some that won't have either, but for the most part, I've got one of those players on every team. So it's also giving me a cheap stack. I'm not trying to pay up, for a big stack. Stacks are huge, even in managed leagues. Last year it was huge for me with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, but it was the right price. Back last year, you got Stephon Diggs in round 6, you got Josh Allen in round 9. So yeah, those are my quarterbacks. But with Hurts, the way I look at it is he's going to score 100 points before he ever throws a ball. And I mean, and it's funny, like Trey Lance is not the best passer, and neither is Jalen Hurts. Justin Fields is not going to be the best passer in his first season, and neither is, Hurts. So he's really the same thing as them, but we know he's the week 1 starter. And so for me, you get him often later than them, and you actually know he's going to start the season. I don't see really any risk of him being benched. Minshew maybe opens the door slightly, but I just feel like they either want to bomb this year or they want to see what they have in him. They either want a better draft pick or they find out that they've got a good player and they perform over expectation this year, and then they don't have to draft a quarterback early next year. They can stick with what they have with him. I think that's going to be their mission. So it's going to be really hard for him to not finish in the top 8 or 9 quarterbacks if he plays the full 16 games with his rushing ability. And if he gets even slightly better as a passer, because he was really bad, but to be fair to him, he was running for his life. That O-line had basically 0 starters left by the time he got in there. And the receivers were all hurt, banged up, in and out of the lineup. It wasn't a really good situation, for him, even though he may not have been the most accurate quarterback in college. And some of that did shine through in the NFL. I think he could easily go from a 52% completion guy to like a 58 or 59, which is still bad. But if you can rush for 800 yards and score 6 rushing touchdowns and then, throw for 3,500 and 25 touchdowns, like you're going to be a good fantasy quarterback.
Plus he gets improved receivers. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
He had Greg Ward and Fulgham starting.
To me, everything is upside for him where he's going. Like, all the downside to me is priced in, given what we think his rushing, floor is.
Gotcha. Dwain, we thank you for joining us. Rhys, any parting words?
Just keep up the great work at PFF and congratulations on the new job.
Oh, thanks, man. We're just, we'll be holding a spot for you. So you can come run the show one day.
Thanks,
I'll be reporting to Rhys.
You sound like Rich. But hey, Dwain, thank you very much for sparing your time for us.
No, man, happy to join you guys. I appreciate you.
Have a great one.
Bye.
Okay, you too. See ya.